In the summer of 2013, under the blazing festival lights of Wacken, 80,000 voices became one. Tears rolled down faces, arms stretched toward the stage, and in that moment, Nightwish wasn't just a band. They were a force of nature, a living, breathing legend in symphonic metal. But this wasn't where the story began. To understand how Nightwish transformed from an idea to one of the most beloved and influential bands in the world, we have to go back, not to a stadium, not to a studio, but to a campfire in the quiet forests of Finland. It's 1996. A young man named Tuomas Holopainen sits with friends beneath the northern sky. Tuomas isn't your typical aspiring rock star. He's shy, introspective, and obsessed with movie scores. John Williams, Hans Zimmer, the music that paints pictures in the mind. As the fire crackles, he begins to wonder, what if those cinematic sounds, usually confined to films, could be fused with heavy metal? Could you create music that felt like both an epic soundtrack and a rock concert? That night, he decides to try, and that decision, in the flicker of a campfire, would change the world of metal forever. Tuomas calls on two people to bring this dream to life. First, guitarist Empu Vuorinen, his longtime friend, and then, a voice unlike any other in the Finnish scene, Tarja Turunen, a classically trained soprano. Tarja's operatic power would become the defining feature of Nightwish's earliest sound. With the three of them united, they record a demo called Angels Fall First. At first, it's raw, a blend of acoustic guitars, keyboards, and Tarja's soaring vocals. But inside those recordings is a spark that listeners had never quite heard before. Released in 1997, Angels Fall First was unlike anything in Finnish metal at the time. It wasn't pure power metal, it wasn't opera, it wasn't film score, it was something new. Songs like Elven Path and The Carpenter hinted at fantasy themes, a love of nature, and that trademark Nightwish blend of beauty and heaviness. Though critics were divided, fans began to notice. This wasn't just another local band, this was something special, but it was their second album, Oceanborn, in 1998, that changed everything. Gone was the tentative experimentation of Angels Fall First. Instead, the band leaned fully into Tarja's operatic strength. Fans began to grow in number. The term symphonic metal became a real genre, and at its core, Nightwish stood as its pioneers. Tuomas once described Nightwish not as a band, but as a universe. He wasn't writing songs, he was writing stories, myths, and epics. Every track was designed to transport listeners somewhere else, the ocean, the stars, dreams and nightmares, and fans felt that vision deeply. Nightwish was no longer just Finland's secret. They were becoming Europe's next big metal export. But behind the beauty of the music, the seeds of future struggles were already being planted. The combination of Tuomas's perfectionism, Tarja's rising stardom, and the pressures of sudden fame created tension. And while no one could have predicted it yet, these early years laid the foundation for the greatest drama in Nightwish's history. By the late 1990s, Nightwish had stepped out of the shadows of local fame and into the light of something much bigger. Their second album, Oceanborn, wasn't just a step forward, it was a leap into a whole new world of sound. Where Angels Fall First had been an experiment, Oceanborn was a declaration. Here was a band with the courage to blend power, metal aggression, classical beauty, and cinematic scale into something entirely new. At the center of it all was Tarja Turunen. Her voice was unlike anything else in metal at the time, operatic, commanding, soaring over guitars with a purity that cut through the chaos. Fans who stumbled upon Oceanborn often described the same reaction, disbelief. Could metal really sound this majestic, this otherworldly? Songs like Stargazers, Sacrament of Wilderness, and Sleeping Sun captured imaginations far beyond Finland. The album turned Nightwish into an international presence, especially in Europe, where metal fans hungry for something fresh embraced this strange new fusion. Tuomas's vision was coming to life, and the genre of symphonic metal was beginning to take shape with Nightwish at its helm. But behind the scenes, success didn't come easy. The band was still young, still learning how to handle the pressures of touring, recording, and sudden recognition. Touring across Europe, they faced grueling schedules, cramped vans, and audiences that didn't always understand what they were hearing. They weren't yet headliners, they were openers, fighting for attention in a crowded metal scene. Yet, those who saw them live walked away changed. In 2000, Nightwish released Wishmaster, their third album, and by then, their reputation was undeniable. Where Oceanborn had introduced the concept, Wishmaster cemented it. By now, Tuomas's ambitions had grown. He wasn't satisfied with just writing songs. He wanted to craft entire worlds. His lyrics leaned heavily on fantasy, myth, and nature, a direct reflection of his love for books, films, and the Finnish wilderness. Touring intensified, and so did the strain on the band. Tarja's role as the star vocalist meant she often bore the spotlight, whether she wanted it or not. Fans adored her, media outlets flocked to her, and slowly, a divide began to form. Nightwish as a collective, and Tarja as its face. Tuomas, shy and introverted, remained behind the keyboards, but in his heart, he was the architect, the storyteller, the one quietly steering the ship. By the dawn of the new millennium, Nightwish was no longer just a promising act from Finland. They were becoming leaders of a new genre. With the success of Oceanborn and Wishmaster, the band had carved out their place as pioneers of symphonic metal, and fans across Europe were taking notice. But 2000 was only the beginning. The years that followed would take Nightwish from cult status to global recognition, fueled by ambition, triumph, and tension that simmered beneath the surface. Wishmaster had solidified Nightwish's reputation, but Tuomas Holopainen wasn't content to repeat himself. By 2002, he was chasing something bigger, darker, and more personal. That vision became Century Child, an album that marked a dramatic shift in the band's sound and identity. Gone was some of the pure fantasy escapism of earlier records. In its place were songs rooted in sorrow, heartbreak, and Tuomas' own inner turmoil. Tracks like Ever Dream and Bless the Child showcased Tarja's operatic power, but this time against heavier guitars and more cinematic arrangements. Tuomas poured his heartbreak into the music, especially in tracks like Dead to the World and Feel for You. At the same time, the orchestration grew more complex. Strings, choirs, and layered arrangements pushed the band closer to the realm of film soundtracks than ever before. Critics began to take them more seriously, acknowledging that Nightwish wasn't a novelty act. They were redefining what metal could sound like. The tours that followed were grueling but triumphant. Nightwish now commanded bigger stages, larger crowds, and international attention. But success came with a cost. The more popular Nightwish became, the greater the pressure on Tuomas. He wasn't just writing songs, he was expected to deliver epics. And Tuomas, ever the perfectionist, carried the weight heavily. Behind closed doors, the cracks began to form. Creative disagreements, the strain of constant touring, and the rising fame of Tarja created a fragile atmosphere. For now, though, the music still held them together. In 2004, Nightwish released Once, the album that would propel them into true international stardom. They had achieved everything they had once dreamed of and more. Chart-topping albums, international fame, critical respect. They had redefined metal, inspired a wave of new bands, and proven that symphonic metal could conquer the world stage. But success has a way of magnifying problems rather than solving them. For all their triumphs, Nightwish was a band on the edge. And soon, that edge would give way to the most dramatic turning point in their history. By 2005, Nightwish had reached the summit. Their album Once had turned them into international superstars. Their concerts drew tens of thousands, and their music had carried symphonic metal into places no one thought possible. But as the crowds grew larger, so did the cracks within. On October 21, 2005 in Helsinki, Nightwish played one of the biggest concerts of their career, a triumphant celebration of their success. The crowd roared, Tarja's voice soared, and the music thundered. But behind the curtain, decisions had already been made. That night, Tuomas handed Tarja a letter that ended her time in the band. The dismissal was made public, shocking fans around the world. Headlines called it a betrayal. Some fans sided with Tuomas, others with Tarja. Friendships fractured, fan forums erupted. It was a moment of heartbreak that would define Nightwish for years to come. In 2007, the band introduced a new voice, Anette Olzon. Unlike Tarja, Anette wasn't a classically trained soprano. Her voice was warm, pop-tinged, more accessible, but also very different from what fans expected. At first, the reactions were mixed. Many loyalists rejected the change, claiming Nightwish had lost their essence. But Tuomas had written some of his most ambitious material yet for Anette to sing. Dark Passion Play, the band's first post-Tarja album, was a massive success, selling millions of copies worldwide. Songs like Amaranth, Bye Bye Beautiful, and The Poet and the Pendulum proved that Nightwish could survive without Tarja and even thrive. The band toured relentlessly, and despite the controversy, their popularity only grew. In 2011, they released Imaginarium, perhaps their most ambitious project ever. Not just an album, but a full-length fantasy film accompanied the release, built around Tuomas's music and vision. By 2012, during a North American tour, the situation became untenable. In the middle of the tour, Anette departed the band. Once again, Nightwish stood at a crossroads. Enter Floor Jansen. Known for her work with After Forever and Revamp, Floor was asked to step in as a temporary replacement. When she walked on stage, many fans didn't know what to expect. But what they got was nothing short of electrifying. Floor possessed not only the classical strength of Tarja, but also the versatility to adapt to Annette's more modern songs. And she brought her own rock power to the stage. It was this perfect combination. And then came the moment that changed everything. Wacken 2013. In front of 80,000 fans, Nightwish performed Ghost Love Score with Floor Jansen at the helm. Her voice soared, her presence commanded, and as the cameras captured tears streaming down the faces of fans, one truth became undeniable. Nightwish had been reborn. That performance is still shared to this day, a moment often described as one of the greatest in modern metal history. With Floor officially joining as lead vocalist, Nightwish entered a new golden era. In 2015, they released Endless Form's Most Beautiful, an album inspired by science, nature, and Charles Darwin. It marked a shift in lyrical themes, focusing less on fantasy and more on the wonder of the real world, evolution, life, and humanity's place in the cosmos. From a campfire dream in Finland to the world's biggest festivals, Nightwish built not just songs, but a universe. Today, when fans gather to sing Ghost Love Score or Weep during the greatest show on Earth, they're not just listening to a band. They're part of a story that has spanned decades. A story of ambition, heartbreak, reinvention, and triumph.